Welcome, surface dwellers, to Dear Watchers, an omniversal comic book podcast where we do a, no pun intended, deep dive into the multiverse.
We are traveling with you through the stories and the worlds that make up an omniverse of fictional reality we all love. And your watchers on this journey are me, Guido.
And me, I'm known by many names, but today I'll go by Rob. And we have an extra special guest, a podcaster extraordinaire, and yes, he brought his own green Speedo. It's Badr Milligan. Hi, Badr.
Hey, what's up, Watchers Nation? My Speedo is it's the chainmail, the green hollow chainmail.
Yeah, perfect. So Badr is indeed a podcaster extraordinary. It's extraordinaire. He podcasts most recently about vinyl records, which we haven't gotten a chance to listen to, but I'm curious about. You podcast about comics for coming on 10 years, you just shared with us. And of course, you also do a ton of work we get to see online from you organizing podcasters in your area of Florida. You've hosted a conference. So, Badr, could you tell us about your work with Podcasters United, the Next Spin, and then, of course, the Short Box comic talk show?
You guys have done your homework. That was really, I was expecting to talk Short Box, but yeah, good job on the homework. On the Short Box, Cesar has banned me from talking about any other podcast that I'm involved with. So this is kind of fun. All right, I guess I'll start off with like, what's my baby, my long time gig, and that's the Short Box, right? It is a comic book talk show that I host alongside some of my best friends. We've been doing it for 10 years, since 2012. We've entertained, I like to believe at least, we've entertained listeners around the world and the multiverse, since we're being topical today, with great conversation about comic books and pop culture topics. We've been recording, like I said, for 10 weeks. Every week we've dropped an episode or tried to drop an episode. And those episodes can range from comic reviews. We do artist spotlights, which are some of our best played and most well-loved episodes where we focus on a comic creator and give them their flowers, We also have interviewed, some of the best creators in the industry. And I like to think, with 10 years and almost 300 over 370 episodes, we have probably talked about, your favorite comic book story. You've probably interviewed your favorite comic creator, and that's, a really big blessing as someone that's, been reading comic books since I was in middle school. It's crazy to think that I've had this opportunity to meet so many of my favorite creators, to travel to cons and speak at conventions and, talk comic books with my best friends every week for the last 10 years. So that's the Short Box podcast. And then, as I started just seeing the podcast community grow and really the podcast industry like really blow up in these like last, we'll say just 5 years, it might even go back further than that. I started getting involved with helping other podcasters in my community here in Jacksonville, Florida. I formed the Jax Podcasters Unite group really just as a means to just meet other podcasters. I think podcasting can be such a I won't say like a lonely thing, but it's definitely like sometimes feels like you're in a silo, I won't say lonely because I've got a great crew and whatnot, but it wasn't always that way. And just overall, it can be such a very tedious and solo thing when you're the host. And I also happen to be the producer and editor and all that. Like it's a lot of work to do by yourself. And I was curious if there was other people podcasting in my city. And that's where the Jax Podcasters Unite happened. And that's been going on for 4 years. And I've been, once again, so lucky to be surrounded by a community of great podcasters and audio creators and be able to, talk about the industry and help each other out. We're having another meetup this week. And it'll be, like I said, 4 years doing that. And then, like at some point, I just was like, you know what? I would love to do a podcast about another hobby of mine, which happens to be like record collecting and talking music. So I started one called The Next Spin with another group of friends, and we were hosting like monthly meetups at everyone's houses. We would just take turns swapping houses, and we'd do like a theme, like, all right, this month, bring your favorite, funk records, your favorite soul records, and of course, it could have just been fun like that. But of course, I wanted to punish myself. And I said, you know what? We should start a podcast about this. So I started Next Spin. That's relatively new. But that to me is like my chance to just have a chance to breathe and have fun. Not saying I don't put in work in it, but short boxes, that's always got my focus, and Next Spin has been a kind of a labor of love so far. So that is kind of like my podcast resume at a glance.
That's amazing. You make me want to be in Jacksonville, Florida, which is a high bar because I'm not a fan of Florida these days. I will say I was born there, so I feel I have more permission to say that because I was born there. But yeah, you do such cool work, so thank you for joining us.
No, I appreciate it. Like I was telling you guys, I to give you guys some flowers at the top. I think the concept of your show is so awesome. I was listening to the Storm episode this week, and it just kind of reinforced that, I love multiverse stories. I think it is a safe assumption that the MCU lately has kind of rekindled that fire for a lot of people, or maybe even started that fire in that interest for a lot of people. And to have the idea of dedicating a podcast to these multiverse stories, and not just in like the MCU, you guys have also done like DC, Amalgam, across publishers. Like, kudos, you guys for coming up with such a great idea. It was one of those instances when I started listening to your show and becoming aware of it, I was a little jealous, like, damn it, I didn't think of that. Such a good idea.
Thank you. Well, that is very high praise coming from you. And we're excited because you and I have been talking about this for a bit, and there was something else. I'm not gonna spoil what originally you were going to come on to talk about, because I am determined that you're going to come back to talk about at least that and plenty more. So yeah, we've been excited for this episode, and we are excited to find something else for us to talk about that's timely with the movie release. And we'll go back into some of your original ideas, because you had some neat suggestions for us, some that I hadn't read. So
awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. And before we jump into today's conversation, Guido, what is new in our little section of the multiverse?
Well, we have been stockpiling some new original art that we're getting ready to launch. So our coffee members will get a preview of it soon. We have some really cool multiversal characters that are coming your way, and you can look into our coffee and become a monthly patron at dearwatchers.com. We also have a few neat things in that coffee store. Good gift shopping, like an Omniverses for Everyone tote bag that we designed. Some great art of the What If the Golden Girls were the original Avengers on a sweatshirt. So a lot of quirky stuff from our artist friends and folks we've commissioned, and we're excited to share that. So more to come.
Christmas season is coming.
Yes.
So
there's more gift giving than just Christmas in the world.
That's true. X-Men mass is coming. So get purchasing. Thank you so much, Guido. And if you are joining us for the first time, we have 3 sections of the show. So that's Origins of the Story, what inspired this other reality. Exploring Multiversity, we dig deeper into our alternate universe. And Pondering Possibilities, we examine the impact and what's followed or coming in the future. And with that, dear watchers, welcome to episode 71. And let's check out what's happening in the Omniverse with today's alternate universe. Today, we are asking the question, what if Prince Namor of Atlantis grew up on land? And a quick preliminary side note on spoilers, we will not be discussing the MCU Namor until our final segment, and we will give you a warning again. So if you haven't seen Wakanda Forever, aka Black Panther 2, you are safe to listen to most of this episode.
So some quick background on this Earth. It's Earth 717, and before we take our trip there, this was originally designated Earth 2061 by an official handbook appendix, but then for some reason was changed to 717 in the handbook A to Z. This is from a series of 6 what-ifs that came out in December 2005. So it's not clear if Earth 717 is all 6 of them. That's what you'll find online. But when you read them, they really don't interlock in any way, so other than the framing device. So it's not clear, but that's where Earth 717 comes from. All of those what-ifs in 2005 featured a new character who only appeared in them Hector Espejo, who is a hacker known online as Watcher, who hacks into other universes and tells the story that way as the framing device. So that's how he got to Earth 717. And for more on Namor, our episodes 23 and 24, we also do What If He Joined the Fantastic Four and What If He Married the Invisible Girl. So you can go back and check out episodes 23 and 24 for more Namor.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. May I add that this 2005 What If series? I don't know. I don't know how you guys read it, but I ended up reading this issue on the Marvel Unlimited app. Mm-hmm. It is a pain in the ass to find this series.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's the way I think Marvel Unlimited is very hard to search, but the What If in particular, because like the formal title of this issue is What If featuring Submariner or What If Submariner, but it's all grouped under What If just 2005 series.
Yep. But once I found it, I was pleasantly surprised to learn a few of these What Ifs that I wasn't aware of, like the Robert Kirkman and Michael Oeming What If Thor was the Herald of Galactus? I've got that tweet up to read next. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's probably the most well known from this year's What Ifs. This is so after What If Volume 2 ends, they do this a few times, and for some reason it's usually in December. There must have been something about the either putting stock in stores or the release calendar where the end of the year would bring this group of What If one-shots. They didn't do it too many years, but there are 3 or 4 years where they do it before they start going into the What If miniseries that they did, and this is one of them.
Well, we are going to get into our backgrounds on Namor in our origin segment, but before we do that, let's talk about our backgrounds with the multiverse and alternate universes, or specifically, Badr, your background with omniverses and multiverses. And we talked about before we got, started recording the podcast that you mentioned that they are kind of everywhere these days. So what is your background? Do you like this kind of storytelling?
Oh, I absolutely love this type of storytelling. For start, especially, and I'll kind of just hone in on What If. Not just What Ifs, but I think just in general, multiverse and Elseworld stories, when you look at like DC specifically, are very reader friendly. And as a kid that was like, reading my dad's books, and he was a huge Marvel fan, like, was collecting heavy in the 70s, even into the 80s. He had a few of these What Ifs, and I found these to be a little more digestible than, say, jumping in on a random issue of X-Men or some of the Avengers he had, because it was like you got a complete story. So through these What Ifs and these one-shots, I was able to kind of build my foundation on the characters. Now, granted, this was telling alternate stories, but usually they would at least juxtapose what was supposed to happen. Mm-hmm. So, I was picking up pieces and, I was kind of building the lore in the MCU kind of canon via What If, and they were just fun. Like, they appealed to me. They were self-contained. They were a little more violent, right? Like, I was always looking for like action in it. So these were like piqued my interest in that regard, and I got introduced to a wide variety of writers and artists. Because it was sometimes you had the best of the best, and these name brand artists on these works and these creators. So for me, it was like it set the foundation, and I think to this day, I still love a good multiverse and Elseworld story because there's no what am I going to say? The stakes are there, but they're also like at a moderate level where you're like, okay, this isn't going to impact like the canon. This is like a fresh story. The creative team also isn't chained to history and what came before. It's like, okay, I can kind of just see them have fun. And sometimes you get that feeling of like, oh, they're having a lot of fun playing with like these different elements and these different versions. And one of the most impactful multiverse stories that to this day I think is maybe in my top 5, if not top 10 favorite comics of all time. And I think it's a little topical considering that, the week that we've had, but Avengers Forever by Kurt Busiek and Carlos, I would say the last name right, Pacheco, is, I can close my eyes and remember reading that for the first time. That, at that point, I credit that story for, which is a heavy, multiverse and, different versions of the characters all meeting each other kind of story, but I credit that story for really making it clear, it being one of the most clear stories I've ever read about time travel and multiverse. Like, for some reason, maybe I was just getting older and, I was getting smarter maybe. But it really just clicked. When I read that, I was like, oh, that's how time travel and its impacts on, like, alternate realities work. It was just so well written. It was so clear. And it felt like a challenge, too, because it was 12 issues. You were dealing with Kang and all this other stuff. Very dense. And, I was definitely reading it in, like, as maybe a sophomore or a junior in high school. At that point, I was just consuming comics like left and right. But there was something very special about that being like, oh, ding, I get multiverse. I get the timeline alternate reality story. So, yeah, like I said, I love a good multiverse story, a good Elseworld story.
That's awesome. Yeah, when I think about that series in terms of how we'll cover it, I have no idea because it is... For a 12-issue series, it is so dense. There's so much in it. You could probably do 12 episodes, one on each issue. So, I don't know. Maybe we'll do that and you can join us one day.
On the other hand, I know on Shortbox you recently covered the Riddler One Bad Day as well, which we've talked about here. And then you can also have that where it's just going to be, okay, it's not the densest, it's a one-off. And someone like me who's a more casual comic reader, just seeing all the Batman titles at my local comic book shop is the most intimidating thing. I would have nowhere to start. But then I just see that one. It's like, okay, I'm going to jump into this one universe that Tom King has created for this one thing and absorb that. So that's also awesome. So it's cool. You could get really in-depth like you're talking about, but you could also get kind of these one-off stories, which are great for more casual readers.
Exactly. Yeah, it's usually my go-to recommendation. When the What If MCU series was popping off, I think we might have done an episode where we all picked our favorite What Ifs and did kind of like a book club of it. But yeah, like for a new reader, it can be very intimidating to tell them to like start Spider-Man. Well, it's like, what Spider-Man? Like the current series, the 5th, the 7th volume, whatever it is. But for Elseworlds and What If, I guess because it just worked on me that, it builds like, it's sort of like doing reps, like, all right, let's build your familiarity with the characters. Granted, this isn't like the canon or whatnot, but you'll get the gist of it. And then if you want to dive into the history, there's always that.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Well, speaking of diving into the history, let's kick off our sneakers, let our ankle feathers fly, and go into origins of the story.
Right now, on this very show, you're going to get the answer to all your questions. Our amazing story begins a few years ago.
And first up, for our origins today, you can go back and listen to episodes 23 and 24 for our first exploration of Namor. But Guido, you're going to give us a quick 30 seconds intro before we talk through each of our own backgrounds with Namor and what we think of him.
Yeah, so Namor the Submariner, a.k.a. Namor Mackenzie, a.k.a. Namor, or now Akul Kul Khan, is the longest-running Marvel character. Marvel's character. He was created in 1939 by Bill Everett, who wrote and drew him for Timely Comics, Marvel Comics 1. Namor, of course, returned to Marvel Silver Age through Fantastic Four, showed up in a whole bunch of titles before getting his own called Submariner, and then throughout the Bronze and Modern Age has gone through eras of overuse, lots of visibility mixed with moments of total invisibility disappearing from the storyline. He's the child of a human sea captain and an Atlantean princess in the comics, now has made his MCU debut, solidifying not just his place as Marvel's longest-running character and quintessential antihero, but also their first mutant.
And now that's something you're super excited about, of course. But Badr, let's start with your background with Namor. Where do you come to this character from?
My dad's Fantastic Four comics. My dad was a huge Fantastic Four fan, and as a kid, I thought they were the most boring comics in the world. It was so dense. It was like, he had a lot of 70s and 80s, and like the way those books are written, very dense, a lot of monologuing. But I was familiar with Namor in that. but there was something that always kind of drew me to Namor. I think it was just like how brash he was, how strong that he'd go toe to toe with like, you know, Hulk and Thor, and like those battles would always be so epic. He also had a very sick Widow's Peak. I've also, you know, been blessed with a Widow's Peak. So we got that in common. And he was one of my dad's favorite characters. And I also recall a lot of like the early Namor comics were drawn by John Buscema, and that guy is one of my favorite artists of all time. I think they call him like the Michelangelo of comics, but there was something about the way he just drew him on those covers. And issue 1 comes to mind. You know, a very old comic, but very regal, very powerful. And I mean, he was one of my favorite characters in Hickman's Avengers and Avengers New Avengers run, and his clash with Black Panther and that ideology that they had as two, you know, monarchs. So yeah, I mean, I've been familiar with Namor for a long time. What I found really interesting in doing the homework that you guys assigned was it kind of dawned on me, like, you know, this is a character that first debuted in 1939, you know, had a run, kind of fell off the map, and then, you know, the Marvel's Golden Age happens, Fantastic Four #1, 1961. So 22 years later, you know, in issue 4, he comes back, and I was thinking, like, that must have been a moment for, like, long-time comic readers of that time. You're talking about a 22, maybe less than 22, we'll just call it 20-year gap of this, like, one of the first, you know, Marvel characters. And for him to just show up, like, that must have been a moment for, like, readers at the time, like, oh, shit, Namor is back. He's been away for 20 years, you know, like, yeah, I found that, like, kind of cool little piece of history that, you know, Stan, Jack, and, you know, the Marvel team were thinking about that. Like, let's find ways to revise these old characters. And we look at them now like, oh, Namor's old as hell. And I don't think it really, you don't really fathom, like, no, he is extremely old. We're talking like 1939, you know, pre-World War II.
Yeah, and that's such a great point. I never thought about what it must have been like if you were old enough in 1964 to remember him from comics in the 40s, then what that must have been like to see him back. That's a cool point.
Yeah. And Guido, what about you? What's your background with Namor?
He was never someone I liked until Hickman's run. I think because I also was never that into Fantastic Four. I've become increasingly into it in the last few years more so, and post Hickman's work on it. So Namor was, because he also was in the background of a lot of the Marvel events, other than like Atlantis Attacks, which I read every Marvel event in the 80s and 90s, but he was never that interesting to me. I think because I just had a resistance to the ocean lore. I wasn't too into this idea of like this whole other kingdom and what it meant. And so I dismissed it and ignored him a lot. Hickman uses him. It's amazing. And then he shows up in Avengers versus X-Men and X-Men Red by Tom Taylor, which is just one of my favorite X-Men team configurations. So I got more into him, but honestly, it was seeing Namor in Wakanda Forever that has me now in love with the character. And it's not just that I'm in love with Tenoch Huerta, but it is the character. Yeah. And I'm excited for us to talk about the character because it really made me want to go back now and explore like the Byrne run of Namor from the 80s and 90s with Jay Lee and stuff that I've always overlooked. So not too deeply familiar, but excited. And
I know we'll talk about the movie version later on, but I just want to say this version, Tenoch Huerta has captured like that heartthrob element. I think even made him like even more of a heartthrob because Namor's always been like pretty smooth, right? Like the way he approaches Sue Storm in the early like Fantastic Fours, like he's got like that side to him. But I feel like Tenoch Huerta, his portrayal is like ultra like smooth lover boy.
Yeah,
Namor. Yeah, all right. Let's remember that. Namor.
Exactly. I think when I was messaging with you, Badr, I even said or replied to one of your tweets or something. I put like N''MOR. Like I sort of want his name to just be Namor. Like that's it from now on. It is that.
Very sick.
I know. I think they almost said it the other way, just so we all know, so we don't all feel bad about mispronouncing it for 80 years. But yeah,
Rob, what's your background?
It was not a character I was super new. I knew super well. He, like you said, Guido, he was always kind of in the background. And for me, yes, I read the comics growing up, but more so I watched the animated series. And he did not have his own show, unlike the Fantastic Four. Even the Silver Surfer, who's probably more secondary than Namor, had his own show. But yeah, Namor didn't. And the one comic I remember him in from the most was when Marvel teamed up with the WWF, but not the wrestling, but the World Wildlife Federation. And they did that one comic with Kazar.
It has the embossed cover with Wolverine, Kazar, the planet Earth. Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, so they were, and I was looking, and
Global Jeopardy, it was called.
Global Jeopardy. Ooh, good
right.
memory. Yeah. And the history of Namor, I was looking, they were trying to make him into a film or TV show for many years, and every single thing was always going to be about saving the environment. So he was always, I guess, very tied to that. And maybe one of the reasons why I didn't know him so well is I was reading that his rights were kind of very hectic for years, and he jumped around to different studios, and Universal actually controlled the distribution rights as late as 2018. So that might have been one of the reasons why he was not popping up in the in the animated shows or in the live action versions, and he was a little bit more in the background.
Yeah. So what do we? I mean, Badr, you have a connection to him because of your father. But what is it about him that you like now as a reader, as a character?
It's just that take no shit attitude, Now, you would never want to hang out with someone like that. You wouldn't want him in your circle. He'd be the guy that would, you'd go to the bar thinking you're having a good time, but for some reason you're always having to break up a fight because he wants to, fight. You wouldn't really want to hang out with the guy. But from afar, you do respect, man, that guy takes no shit, he must know what he wants in the world, and he's not going to let anyone stop him. So I think, there is a sense of, you can admire that to an extent. And I think just the character lore, too, like I said, having done our episode about Namor and then, hopping on, doing this one and doing some more reading, it's just crazy to think that, he's been around for so long that, even before Marvel Comics was literally called Marvel Comics, that he was going to be one of their first character alongside Human Torch. And it got me thinking about some of the history books I've read about comic books. And for some reason, Alex Ross comes to mind, and him talking about I don't know if he was alive when this book came out, but the issue where Namor and Human Torch fight each other, and I can't recall what issue that was, but whoever was talking about it was talking how it was such a big moment to see two superheroes fighting each other, and then you've got the elemental kind of theme going on, fire versus water. So really, I think what still draws me to the character is the way that he hasn't really aged, or literally hasn't really aged, but hasn't really changed for the most part. He's still very brash. He's still very regal. He still has a mistrust of the surface world. And regardless if he's I'm sorry. And what I do also like is that writers are still finding interesting ways to work that mutant angle, to really embrace it and have him in positions of the X-Men, and you see that juxtaposition, and then we brought up Hickman's run, to see his juxtaposition with Black Panther. He's a character that you can kind of put in with anyone, with any team, and you're going to have some interesting dialogue, because he's that fire starter, so you're going to get some cool drama or bickering and back and forth. He's a very petty guy,
It is neat to see. We went back and looked at the 1939 Marvel Comics 1 to see, since that was not even written with an intent of a recurring character or anything like that, but all of those traits are there, and it is interesting when you see that, because that's so rare for a character to be introduced with these personality traits, to be introduced as an anti-hero, probably. Maybe one could argue one of the first comic book anti-heroes, certainly superhero comic book anti-heroes. I mean, the issue ends with him saying he's going to continue his further adventures in his crusade against white men. Like, he's positioned as an anti-hero solidly, and that attitude he has, like, it's neat that has been so consistent for a character who was sort of rebooted when he found his way into the Fantastic Four, but they kept all those pieces.
I think consistent is the word I was trying to aim for. It's like he has been consistently the same person this whole time. Like, he's been true to himself. The interesting thing comes in when he's like, depending on what writer gets him and how they, where they put him, whether it be with the X-Men or with the, the secret or the New Avengers and etc. And just to recap, I quickly looked it up. That Namor and Human Torch fight was in Marvel Comics number 9. So 8 issues, after both of their debut, that epic kind of big battle goes on.
And you even mentioned it, Badr, but I was reading that one of the reasons Bill Everett created him as is because the android Human Torch had already been created, and he wanted that fire and water element. And it's so interesting that even when Namor reemerges in Fantastic Four many years later, it is the Johnny Storm Human Torch that's the one that actually finds him there as well. And like the hot-headedness of Johnny Storm and the literal hot-headedness of Johnny Storm with the literal and figurativeness of Namor, those characters have always been connected in one way or another.
That's a good reference. Good point.
Yeah, good point.
Well, speaking of Namor and the Human Torch, why don't we explore our multiversity?
I am your guide through these vast new realities. Follow me and ponder the question, what if?
And today we are discussing What If Submariner. That's Volume 1, Issue Number 1 from February 2006. And the story is entitled, What If Prince Namor of Atlantis Grew Up on Land?
And this is written by Greg Pak, penciled by David Lopez, inked by Jay Layston and Scott Hanna, colored by Laverne Kinzerski, lettered by David Lanphier, edited by Mark Panaccia and Nathan Cosby. And in terms of those two creators, Greg Pak is very known to most Marvel readers. He's still writing extraordinary comics, predominantly for Marvel, where he's written hundreds and hundreds of books, including X-Men, Hulk, Agents of Atlas, Star Wars titles. And this is one of 2 what-ifs that he wrote. And David Lopez was primarily a cover artist for Marvel until this issue, when he was doing interiors. He actually doesn't do the cover of this issue, only the interiors. And he's done a few dozen interiors since for Marvel through to this year. And he's done some work on Catwoman for DC. And he co-created Fallen Angel with Peter David for IDW, which is a favorite of mine, I used to love that series. So those are our creators. And then, Badr, do you want to try to give us a sense of what is happening in this issue?
Yeah. All right, hell yeah. All right, let me take a stab at it. So I'm going to start off with the synopsis, because I always think like those do a good job of getting us level set, and I'll add to that. So the synopsis for this issue of What If reads, the history books tell us that young Prince Namor, the proud son of an Atlantean princess, joined the Allied fight against the Nazis in order to protect his undersea people. But what if Namor grew up on land with his human father, filled with hatred for the Atlanteans who killed his mother? For whom will he fight when World War II sweeps the planet and Atlantis calls for help? And in what terrifying ways might the course of history be changed forever? Now, I'll add on to that. We do see Namor's side of the surface world, so no surprise there. Specifically America as kind of like a secret weapon/CIA agent to fight against the Nazis when the war pops off, alongside Jim Hammond, the original android Human Torch. As the story progresses and as the war ends, a small group of Nazis seeking revenge on the world after suffering defeat not only discover but also enslave the kingdom of Atlantis, who at this time, don't have Namor there. He's kind of picked sides. He's, kind of casted away his Atlantean birthright. So these Nazis, the small kind of like sect or break off sect of Nazis, believe that the original and great Aryan race were the original Atlanteans, or at least came from the original Atlanteans before their bloodline became tainted, and some of those joined like the surface world. The small group of Nazis find a way to also merge their blood with the Atlanteans to become superhumans. So not only have they enslaved the Atlanteans, but also decided to experiment on them to become Atlantean kind of hybrids themselves. They've also managed to turn the Human Torch, who Namor thought to be dead after a mission went wrong. They managed to turn the Human Torch into a bomb, and Namor tries his best to attain two goals at this point: defeat these underwater Nazi superhumans and save his best friend's life. Unfortunately, both of those attempts are robbed of him by the American government, who decides to basically initiate initiate the Human Torch bomb, destroying Atlantis, and believing that they've also killed off Namor in an attempt to destroy Atlantis, but also cover up the existence of Atlantis with hopes that no one will ever utilize these superpowered citizens or be a threat to the world order again. Of course, the story ends like most what ifs, with a rather kind of open plot thread of Namor, being alive and in a way kind of swearing a silent oath of vengeance. The way I kind of interpret it is that it went full circle, where now Namor has the fire in him and the reason to hate the surface world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's. Thank you for that. That covered everything that happens on this Earth 717 issue. So
I had to come correct, all right? I was like, I'm on the Dear Watcher show. Plus game.
Yeah. So what do you all think of it?
Rob, you want to take that one?
Sure.
Rob,
Initial opinions?
I don't know. I'm a sucker for these kind of stories that kind of are these alternative not just alternative universes, but really alternative histories and going back into the past, especially I guess because we have mythologized World War II so much, and because the Nazis are just can always be a villain, and we're involved in the occult and experimentations. They're so easy to kind of to further explore. I'm a big JSA fan, and the JSA had many stories that were very similar to this, where we're then exploring the JSA during World War II, and that the Nazis have now taken up some kind of occultism. They've partnered with like the Norse gods in that story. So I was seeing a lot of similarities here, and it seems like it's a classic story of, you take this prodigal son who then leaves his homeland, or doesn't even want to embrace his homeland, and then has this difficult decision to stay what he really considers home, and then seeing the ramifications from that. That really, to me, is almost the what if question of this, less than what if he grew up on land. It is less as rather than even what if he had embraced that water life, the undersea life.
Yeah, I thought the title, but I think you can always sometimes point to some of the what if titles can be a little misleading, maybe not meant to be taken quite literal. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think the bigger question was, what if Namor declined his birthright and decided to live a life on land? But I thought the catalyst for that decision for him was a cool twist, where his mother dies due to the Atlanteans kind of like being on the hunt for her and her soon to be born child. I thought that was a unique twist, and I mean we've kind of seen this story a lot of times, right? Like promised prince or king declines his birthright in the beginning. Something catastrophic happens, and he realizes, like, I've got a bigger responsibility than myself. For some reason, it made me think of, like, the infamous, Spider-Man saying, "With great power must also come great responsibility."
Sure. Yeah,
like, he's denying that responsibility to live this life as a secret agent and fighting alongside America. So to see it all kind of come to fruition, I thought story-wise it was a rather complete story. I do think the pacing in the beginning was a little quick. I was like, this is going by pretty fast.
Because Pack introduces these plot elements like this idea that he's an outcast, and there's that really sort of dark scene where he's trying to cut off the wings off his ankles because he doesn't want to be a freak. So Pac is like doing a lot of character building work, but it happens really fast because he only has a few pages to do it. So it does feel
like there was,
rushed.
I think the jump between him basically declining, the Atlanteans offer. I forget the name of the characters that showed up. Like, hey, come back home. Between that and then him just becoming a badass, like kind of weapon and spy for America.
Yeah,
I think that just happened so quick, and I would have loved to maybe see that fleshed out a little bit as far as like him embracing like his role and the training and meeting like Jim Hammond, because you immediately it just takes you into like, all right, he works at the CIA, he is friends with Jim Hammond. And go, like that's what I'm saying. The pacing. Now, granted, it is a 26-issue comic book. I think this is one that maybe would have benefited from being maybe like a 32, maybe a 50, to get that full kind of emphasis. But overall, Greg Pak to me is such a strong writer.
I agree.
Yeah, he can't really do no wrong in my book.
I agree. I'm a big fan of his, and I think what he does here that's really cool that made me really like this a lot is the elements from Namor's Timely Comics version that he pulls in. So not just Jim Hammond, but even Namor's playing a role in World War II. And I know that, in Marvel Comics, modern comics, there have been lots of invader stories told telling that story. Obviously, in this Earth, the invaders never form. So it's cool that Pac decides to explore, like, okay, what role would he play in World War II? Yeah. What role would Atlantis play in World War II? And so I liked those elements. And then, like you said, the fact that it ends, it does what a lot of classic what ifs do, which is it sort of returns you to the status quo in this different Earth. So the fact that it ends almost like the 1939 Timely Comics, I was saying, it ends with him saying, like, we'll see more adventures of his war against men. This ends with, like you said, a clear suggestion that he is now going to take vengeance on the surface. And that is now what the American government is afraid of, is that because they realize his name meant avenging son in this Earth. So it's cool that Pac holds on to so much of what's core to the story, but tells it in this totally different timeline that is a totally different world. So I like that too.
Yeah, I think there's a strong element in all of the Namor stories, but it comes out here too about this idea of passing or fitting into society, and you can see also allusions to race in that way as well. And you have that with the segment where his peers are trying to pressure him into jumping into the water, and he can't because both he was told to stay away from the water, but it would also reveal his wings on his ankles and that idea. And then that's continued with his conversation with the Hammond Human Torch, where they're saying, well, the people, the soldiers love us when we're fighting, but afterwards, do they see us as human? Do they see us as an android and as this Seaman? And also, I think that perfectly ties into him also being a mutant, and it's such a core X-Men idea as well, as who can pass, who can't, and even with the with the Fantastic Four as well, where you have the Thing as the one character who can't pass, and then of course Sue's with Reed, who can walk amongst people, and that kind of conflict also with Namor, who can kind of be of both worlds. So I feel like that's such a core element to the character as well.
Yeah, Greg Pak is someone that understands like those core attributes of the character really well, and that's what I meant. And kind of going back to our earlier conversation, like about Namor being very consistent. I think he is a character that when he first debuted, you kind of got like the full gist of him, right? Like royalty. A mutant, very angry for these reasons. So I feel like you didn't really have to build a lot. Like it didn't really need to be built upon that much. Like you could just explore those facets of him. And I think that's what I enjoyed about this was Greg Pak clearly shows like I have a very good understanding of the character because he came out the gate relatively pretty interesting and pretty well-rounded. And it feels like a very complete Namor story where he explores all those different shades of him. Like, all right, let's touch on like him being a mutant, dealing with like being an outsider and like this birthright of his.
Yeah, I agree. So, Badr, you mentioned this could be a longer issue. So, before we leave Earth 717, I mean, would we want more from this? I'll start. I think it could be a miniseries, honestly. I think it could have been a few issues, because he could have filled in some of that trauma as a young person. He could have filled in, like you said, the gap between that moment and him becoming an agent. Could have filled in more of his relationship with Hammond. And then certainly there's a sequel here of like, how does he attack this world and the world power should be slightly imbalanced, because there were hybrid Nazis living under the water. So we can imagine the world might be a little different for other reasons. So
I think aside from kind of filling in or letting some of the early character building moments breathe, this could easily be a mini series, because to me this Namor is a little more softer around the edges. Like he clearly has like that rage in him from just being an outsider and having to keep that secret, but there was some like sort of compassion with him too, like when he's talking to Hammond, and the fact that like he wanted to save his friend, even though technically his friend for the most part was kind of dead already. The Nazis basically were using his dead body and robot parts to power this bomb. He still like wanted to save him, and that kind of cost him his kingdom. But I would have been interested to see how he would deal with the fact that like he once only knew of the surface world, and that's what he called home, and that's what where he originally sided. Now he's got to turn against them, right, and find like really explore his Atlantean side. Because I mean we're so accustomed in the 616 to seeing the reverse of that, where he's fully entrenched in being a proud Atlantean, having no kind of just owning the surface world in that connection. But in this one, it's reversed, and now you're like, okay, now he's got to explore like what it means to be Atlantean, that history and his people.
Yeah, and maybe there's even a sequel where the Americans are trying to copy the Nazi experiments, and the Americans are going, well, hey, we want to be superhuman that can breathe underwater and on land too, like that. And how does Namor feel about that? And I think that certainly can show the gray areas of all of where he's functioning as this kind of super spy. And that could be a really interesting story.
Well said. And I wouldn't mind seeing more of like just David Lopez's art. He wasn't an artist that like is at the top of my mind when I saw his name, but by the end of it, I was like, this dude just has his art is very beautiful. He makes it feel like you're underwater without like being kind of like awkward about it. His action scenes are great. I thought he's just a very strong artist, and the colorist too, like complements his line art really well.
Yeah, I agree. Especially when I saw that this was his first interior work. That's
wow.
So cool that he'd done so much cover work.
Yeah, he knocked it out the gate. Like I said, and I think that whole point I made about like this Namor being a little more compassionate and softer on the edges, I think is all linked to just David Lopez's portrayal of the character. Like a lot of like there was like a level of softness to his artwork.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I agree about the art.
Well, let us hook a ride on a whale and journey over to the nation of Wakanda as we ponder some possibilities.
Will the future you describe be averted?
So, Guido, what are we talking about for our pondering possibilities?
Well, this was an easy one. The movie just came out, so we're talking about that version of Namor and seeing how it ties in.
And this would be really when the spoilers will be abundant, let's imagine. So if you haven't seen Wakanda Forever, you can turn us off, go listen to an episode of the Short Box podcast, and then and go see the movie. And then once you've done both of those things, you can finish this episode. but this
Good mark.
is Black Panther Wakanda Forever, the MCU film from 2022.
And it's directed by Ryan Coogler, who did the story, and the screenplay is by him and Joe Robert Cole. It's produced by Kevin Feige and Nate Moore, and of course starring Tenoch Huerta Mejia, credited as Tenoch Huerta, who is our Namor in this movie. So, so I think we're all fans, right? It seems clear we're all fans of his portrayal.
Yeah.
Namor's introduction into you couldn't have gone any better. That was all. I didn't know what to really expect. I think I was so focused on, how they were going to handle, Chadwick Boseman passing the mantle of Black Panther. I was looking forward to Namor making his introduction and seeing that play out, but I guess I vastly underestimated how much of a captivating performance I was going to get from Tenoch.
I think what was a part of his performance for me that made me just fall totally in love with the character and through his performance is that he does everything we've described is part of the character of Namor. He's intense, but he's also has a charm and a charisma to him, and he has a passion that's good, right? He has a passion for his people or for taking care or a cause, but he also is willing to do something that makes him really dark and that makes him the anti-hero through the entire film, through to the final epilogue of the film, right? Like, again, with that consistency and through Tenoch's really incredible performance, like, I was swayed by his argument, and I am someone who does not like violence. I'm someone who does not like oppression either and would like to dismantle it. And his conversations with Shuri, like, I was swayed. I was like, yeah, you know what? Maybe these two should burn it down. I think maybe he's onto something. So that's his performance, like, really pulled me in, but kept the fact that this character shouldn't be someone we support. Maybe. I mean, that's where it was so good to me.
Yeah, that little bit of dark side to him is what keeps him so interesting. And I think that's what's kept him so consistently interesting throughout the years is, like, he's going to have moments of heroism where he does the right thing, maybe for, the larger majority. But at the end of the day, like, it's all about him. Like, he's doing this for him and his people, and that's always going to take precedence. I might, save the world of the Avengers because, it also impacts me, but then I'm going to turn around and make this decision or do this action that comes in direct conflict with them. And I thought that was still prevalent in the movie here, where it was like he's like a chess master. He was thinking like steps ahead. And like you said, the epilogue, right? Like, he could have been seen as like a sign of weakness, and we kind of take it like, oh, thank God they stopped fighting. They arrived at a mutual agreement. And it's like, well, the only reason he agreed is because he's thinking 10 steps ahead. Like, well, they don't have any allies. Oh, they're going to get into war later on. I'm going to play it cool right now.
Yeah. You can definitely see shades. I thought it was very smart to have him be, in some ways, a variation too on Killmonger's motivations from the first film, because Killmonger wants to also, in some ways, better the world by having repressed people be championed by Wakanda. But at the same time, you always get the sense that Killmonger also wants power and he wants to uplift himself. That's why he also destroys all the heart-shaped herb in the first movie. He wants to be the guy. And I think with Namor in this new movie, you get that it's a more defensive and less offensive approach to it. He wants, first and foremost, to protect his kingdom and his people, but at the same time, he's realizing, like Killmonger, hey, between the two of us, we could make the world a better place. But you don't get that sense of ego that his predecessor had, kind of trying to get the same end results.
Yeah, and awesome point on the defense. On that defense point, because the whole catalyst for this, right, is the illusion and the secrecy of Atlantis is now jeopardized. So he's got to get ahead of it, right? Like he's got to, like I said, he's thinking 2 steps ahead where it's like, okay, they're looking for vibranium in the ocean that can only, there's going to come to a point. We stop them now, but this is going to continue happening.
Yeah.
So either you guys stop it, or But at the end of the day, he also had like, man, I guess I just admired his cunningness and the fact that there was that bravado and that facade of like the outward appearance was like very charming, very like thoughtful, like he's coming from a good place, but he had it always felt like he had the ace in his hand the whole time. Like his real plan of wanting to go to war was something that like man, it just played with me big time.
Yeah. I also think I want to give some props to Ryan Coogler and Kevin Feige and Nate Moore and the designers for really staying comic book true to the character in pretty much every way in terms of his look. Because I think there was a lot of discourse when it was mentioned that he was going to be a character. It was like, well, you can't do the green Speedo or you can't do the wings on the feet. Like these things are all silly. And then sure enough, when they made the movie, like he looks...
Oh yeah.
Yes, there's new elements that they incorporated, especially taking from the Mayan culture, but the general look with the Speedo, with the wings, is there, and I definitely think it's. I'm very glad that they did not just discard that because that's so silly. That's something that was created in 1939. No, let's actually honor that and add to it.
If anything, this version is such. Like this canon just makes so much sense, for it to be based on like Mesoamerican and for them to create like their own, this Talokan culture. You see him with the beads, the jewelry. It's like, well, yeah, the green Speedos makes a lot of sense. It just fits so well. And to your point about the initial discourse, I think that was something maybe we even joked about was like, you think they'll do the wing feet? Like that's something that is so comic booky, like this silly idea of like wings on someone's ankles, very tiny wings up, lifting a 200-pound man in the air so elegantly. It's a comic book silly idea, but seeing it in action, I thought that was the coolest shit ever. Like the fact that he is so powerful and he's got these wings on his feet that move so fast, and yeah, they nailed it. Like such a great portrayal of the character and a fresh that just like I said, the idea of Talokan and it felt like such a believable world. You're like, no, this all makes sense. This is what he should look like.
Yeah. That's my one struggle now, and this is I think why they try not to make too many decisions about characters that are going to diverge from the comics, because I'm like, I want that comic. Like I want the Mayan people in the water, in the civilization, not the Atlanteans. So it's like hard now. I have to sort of transpose in my mind as I go back and read a lot more of his stories because I want those connections. And I imagine they'll start making them in the books because often the influence is inevitable. One thing I loved too that they did, and it's interesting to me that Greg Pak also rewrote the origin of his name, because of course the origin of his name is that it's Roman backwards. But Pak came up with the idea that it means avenging son. But one of my favorite moments in this movie was it being no love for the surface. That moment when he was like, Namor is because he has no love for the surface dwellers. That struck me, and I was like, "Oh my god, I am in love with this concept." So that was such a cool retooling of his name and how it fits into the Mayan origin. Taking obviously No and Amor, and it was so.
My buddy
powerful.
said that was one of the greatest rap names he's ever heard in his life.
Yes.
You said something in the you said something in the beginning about Atlantis always kind of being boring to you, and I felt the same way as a kid, and maybe even now. But like I could care less about Atlantis because it was like, it's basically like Greco-Roman type, culture, and I've just seen so much of that, Like now, granted, I love Greek mythology, I love Roman mythology, but Atlantis to me just always seemed rather boring. Like the identity wasn't that enticing or that unique. It was just like, all right, it's the Greek-Roman Empire just underwater, with fish around. This version though was really refreshing to see, and to your point, I wouldn't mind. And I'm always someone that's like, oh man, Marvel, just stay strong. You don't always have to like mimic the the movies, but this is a case where I'm like, actually, go ahead and dive into this a little more. Show me this world in comic format.
Exactly. I'd like Wanda to be a mutant, but I'd like Namor to be Mayan. So I want both of those things.
Yeah, Guido and I were saying yesterday that it feels like a missed opportunity for them to, speaking of multiverses and alternate universes, to just do a comic line that is a bit more tied to the movies, and then you can kind of have it both ways and have Namor have these Mayan backgrounds, have the MJ and the Ned and the young Aunt May of that Spider-Man universe, and have that in a comic. It seems like, for, as we were saying, for a company that's obsessed with synergy and making sure the shows are on ABC and on Jimmy Kimmel and all at the same time, it seems like a no-brainer to let's just do another alternate universe exploring this Namor in comics, and then we can keep the canonical comics Namor as is, so we don't, piss off those fans too.
Yeah, damn, that's a fucking great idea. Sorry for my language. That's solid ass idea. Because you're also thinking, like, wouldn't that benefit potential new readers that
totally.
Are looking for the MCU stuff? Like, hey, why doesn't I know I can say, my friends and people I know that fall in love with the MCU show, the reason why they don't get into comics, it looks nothing like it. They don't feel that synergy. They don't feel that synergy there. So that's a solid point that the MCU should have its own line of comics within Marvel, whether it be What If or like kind of like an ultimate line. Yeah, I feel like people would be eating those comics up.
Yeah.
Agreed. So, do we see any connection to Greg Pak's alternate Namor of 717 in the movie depiction?
I think just that maybe what I brought up about like the Greg Pak Namor being a little more soft around the edges, a little more likable, a little more understanding. I think that character attribute is like you had brought up, like this Namor seems, I think he definitely has. I won't say he leads with his heart. I think he leads with the heart and his mind. I think his heart is actually in play rather than like being so quick to make a decision. I felt like with the traditional comic Namor, it is really black or white for him. Like it's rarely like ever any gray. Like that's just to me like how he makes his decisions. Like he doesn't take time for maybes and all that. He's about his action. But Namor in the movie was like methodical, you know what word I'm trying to say. That's how I felt about the Greg Pak Namor, is that he didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't he at this point in the story his confidence wasn't like completely concrete, so he was like malleable. He was talking to Hammond about what it's like to be an outsider and experiencing like being an outsider.
Yeah. I can't speak to some of his later appearances, but certainly when you read him in the Jack and Stan era, he's a little rapey. He's picking up Sue and throwing her around and making a lot of orders. And you definitely don't get that when he's interacting with Shuri in this movie. It is much softer. And also their approach to how, maybe this also changed over time, but I know how Stan wrote him is very lofty, oratorical, very big Shakespearean light almost. And here you definitely don't get that sense. And Greg Pak also does the same thing, where he's much more relatable. And I think in the Greg Pak one, you can say, well, it's because he was growing up on Earth, he doesn't speak like that. And here, I think like maybe it was a decision for the film to make him also a little bit more digestible. But I think it was a smart decision to avoid that style of speaking.
The other connection I'd make, and Badr, you sort of mentioned the outsiderness, and I'd say what's true for both the MCU, Namor, and Greg Pak on Earth 717 is also the trauma informing who they are.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe that's a part of the 616 character at some point, but it's not clear in his early origin issues, at least. And in, Pak doing those scenes where he's being... not even just the loss of his mother, which of course is a trauma, and in the 616 it's the loss of his father, and so that trauma exists, but the ostracizing that he's experiencing and the rejection and then that extraordinary scene in the movie when he comes back to the surface as a child and has the colonizers and the violence that he's witnessing and really decides like that's it, he's done. So I think that's another interesting thing that both this alternate Earth and the MCU are pulling out of the character.
I think a big drastic difference that I noticed from like the traditional Namor in the comics. I mean, we all might have seen it in because I read Fantastic Four issue 4, which is the first appearance of basically like Namor in the Marvel universe that we know. It was a rather like his motivation for hating the surface world, I thought just was really quick, and I kind of attribute that to maybe just the way comics were written back then, where they're not going to spend a lot of time on explaining and diving into the mind of the character. But he wakes up from amnesia, he jumps into the water, he goes to find Atlantis, he finds that all of his friends have basically like moved because where they were at like is polluted. And from there, it's like, boom, okay, I hate the surface world. Going
yeah.
It's like, God damn, you even want to try looking for your friends? Maybe they just move. So, and that's safe to say, like, a big motivation for the character, like, throughout the years, just that environmentalist, like, in him for the most part, right? Like, the surface world fucks over the ocean, we pollute, overfish, things like that, which is, an interesting motivation for such a hot-headed, brash, strong, regal character that he cares about the environment. That's kind of cool. I noticed a complete absence in that in the not only Greg Pak version of Namor, but also in the MCU version. Like they didn't approach it from an environmental standpoint. It kept in line with Ryan Coogler's Black Panther, which is addressing, indigenous people, the impact of colonialism. So I thought that it made sense, but I did notice that, oh, wow, there is no sense of, like, he never once brings up, like, oh, look, the world is polluting in my ocean, and, that.
Yeah, that's a great point.
They figured the Global Jeopardy comic took care of it all. So just go read that. That's all you need.
Well, I think that's a wrap because, Badr, I'm sure you have, I think, probably 28 more episodes of podcast to record today, right?
I will say, I was thinking last night, like, why do I do this to myself on my weekends? Like,
I know. We're always saying the same thing. Yes.
Yeah, and that's what I was telling you guys, like, to be podcaster for 10 years. A lot of people are like, man, that's really awesome and commend me, and I appreciate it. But I always want to tell people, look, don't applaud my craziness. Please don't applaud like how crazy and mentally ill I kind of am. But yeah, I'm recording an episode of the Short Box today. I did a Whatnot show last night. I got to edit this Black Panther episode. So it's like my weekends are dedicated to pie. But I love it, Well, I'm sure you guys can relate, where it's like it truly is a labor of love, and emphasis on the labor,
Well, we thank you for
thank you,
dedicating some of your time today to being here.
No, this was a lot of fun. Like I said, I think the concept of your show is awesome. You guys you guys bring up really, really awesome points. You guys don't just look at the surface. Wow, a lot of puns going on. You guys don't just look at the surface level of comics. You guys do a great job of exploring the different themes and motives, and I love that in comics because to me, it is an art form, and it is the best art form because you're getting like the best of both worlds. You're getting like literature and themes and topics that existentialism, things like that, and you're getting great artwork. The comic books are the best art form, and you guys do it justice.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
And if you want to hear a great podcast, Badr, can you tell people where they can find you and what other shows, how they can follow you on the socials and all that good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. You can check out the Short Box Podcast, a comic book talk show on your favorite podcast app. So whatever you're using to listen to Dear Watchers, look for the Short Box, right? Look for the Gauntlet logo. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, pretty much everywhere that podcasts are. Like I said in the beginning, we've been doing it for almost 10 years. We're on episode 374. I say this with a money-back guarantee. We have probably talked about your favorite comic book. We've interviewed your favorite comic book creator. There is an episode or 2 or 10 or 50 of them for you over at the Short Box. And you can follow us on social media by really just going to shortboxjax, JAX.com. Or looking for us on Instagram and Twitter at the Shortboxjax.
Yeah, you literally have one a day for a year, and then some change. So that should be your that could be a challenge for someone.
No, you just gave me that is a great sales pitch. I didn't even think about that. You're right. We're at that point now where you could listen to the Short Box for a year straight. I've always wanted to, because I'll get emails, and I think that's the benefit of having so many episodes is when new listeners join the show, they've got such a long back catalog.
Totally.
And at some point we stopped doing we stopped being so topical and try to do evergreen episodes. But I always want to email back those people like, yo, thanks for jumping in. Can you tell me like at what point we got really good, you know? Because it's like I listened to some of the earlier ones, and I just know we probably had like 2 or 3 different strides where it was like, oh, we just got better.
Yeah.
I've always been curious from like someone that takes the time to listen to a back catalog. What are their thoughts on the progression? Do the homework for me, right?
Yeah, totally. We'll go back and see that people are listening to our first episode of this show, and it's like, maybe don't start at the beginning.
I say that all the time. I say that all the time. It's like, you know what? I'm over here advocating for easier jumping on points for comic readers. And I'm over here contradicting myself. Like, hey, jump on that episode like 242. Don't worry about the others. I want to also just shamelessly plug. It's been on my mind the whole time, ever since the intro. But this Golden Girls as the Avengers sweatshirt that you guys have on your Ko-fi is fucking amazing. It's so rad.
I wore the T-shirt version to New York Comic Con, and I can tell you that it was the number one thing that people were stopping us, the whole weekend. We're like, wait, where can I get that shirt? What is that? That's amazing. So yes,
great.
it was. So if you wear that at your next Comic Con, you're sure to make good friends. That could be our sales pitch.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yes, and you can find that at our Coffee page. You can support Dear Watchers at Coffee. You can read fun little essays that we write, get bonus episodes there. And, Guido, where else can people find us?
Our reading list and links to Badr's work will be in the show notes. You can follow us online anywhere at Dear Watchers. DearWatchers.com has those other links to Coffee.
And please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back soon with another trip through the multiverse.
And in the meantime, in the words of Uatu, keep pondering the possibilities.